Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second episode of Two Games at Once, Undertale and Cave Story. In the previous episode, Undertale made it through the tutorial, and Cave Story made its way to Bushland. And now that we're out of the tutorial in Undertale, it's my hope that eventually we will be able to cut down on the number of jumps that we need to make here and there in the video. That being said, the upcoming area is full of puzzles and swaths of open areas. Cave Story's not much better in that there'll be lots and lots of backtracking, and the platforming is starting to actually become a bit of a challenge just to gather random things. As you'll see, I come back to this place to grab jellyfish juice again and again and again, and it might look like a simple jump, but if I'm doing my job and trying to play both games at the same time, these small jumps are not as simple as I would like them to be. But you are now truly seeing the benefit to playing two games at once, where one game has very long dialogue. The other game can at the very least make some sort of entertaining progress, or at the very least not some scene that we have witnessed time and time again. Anyone who has played through either of these games, maybe they're a little bit tired of the dialogue. I wouldn't necessarily say that I am, but then again, I simply don't want to let this video drag on and on with all of this conversation. But don't worry, I'm not going to be entirely leaving out Papyrus and Sans, as they are obviously the fan favorites of the series. There will be much of them to come. We pick up a very quick new weapon in the bub line. And now once again, we come up to this jellyfish and we gather up some more of its juice. We will continuously need to come back here. In Undertale, we haven't been making too much progress for the last couple of minutes, but Cave Story is making leaps and bounds. We have already gathered up the jellyfish juice that we needed to go back to Nimiga Village and pick up the bubline weapon, though its uses are limited in this style of playthrough, as it's very difficult to shoot things that you want to shoot and not shoot things that you don't want to shoot, as I nearly die to many upcoming enemies that retaliate. At the beginning of the video, we also picked up another health upgrade, which we will be making great use of in the upcoming fights, as we're starting to not quite yet see the difficult bosses. Cave Story has a very slow startup, but we are getting to the point where the bosses can consistently deal good damage, which, if I can't dodge them, gives us a very, very short time frame. And now that we're through the chimney, we can start making our way into the second half of Grasstown, as Undertale gets into a fight with an enemy that very highlights the most difficult part I've been having with Undertale, and that is, I don't remember all of the fights, and the ones I do, at best, I remember one or two things that you can do. The way that people typically figure out what to do is by reading what the enemy says, and it's difficult to read and move in Cave Story at the same time. And an additional health upgrade is going to be wonderful in the upcoming difficult area, we'll say. In Cave Story, we've now reached the point of the main quest in this area, and that is Arthur is trapped in this building, so we need to get him out, which requires many steps and lots of backtracking. But luckily, in the upcoming area in Undertale, it will give us a lot of opportunities to focus on accomplishing these tasks, and we won't have to worry about too many difficult interruptions. Although, that being said, there is many mini-bosses in the Snowdin outskirts. I happened to mention in the previous video that it was very much tempting to not pick up the missile launcher, And you may have seen why that is, where we are taking, often, a lot of damage, no matter where we go or what we do. So the amount of weapon experience and hearts we're going to need is much higher than a normal playthrough. And picking up that missile launcher reduces your chances of getting weapon experience or those hearts. And the missile launcher will be not particularly useful for the most part. We'll see if picking it up was actually a mistake, but we'll have to wait and see on that. That being said, the real crux of the problem of avoiding the missile launcher is you can't easily avoid it. You might think, well, it's simple, just don't pick it up. Well, unfortunately, there's many missile upgrades strewn about the game. And instead of your typical game, where if it's something like this, say in Metroid, for example, well, picking up the missile launcher is simply unavoidable. Now, in Cave Story, it's not, but they really want you to have the missile launcher. So, if you skip picking up the missile launcher, any missile ammo upgrade in the future will instead be the initial missile launcher. So, not picking it up is harder than it seems, and if I could remember every single chest in the game, maybe I would really try to avoid it, but I'm not going to bother. Plus, accidentally opening a chest is entirely possible, given that anytime I walk down in Undertale, my character in Cave Story is very tempted to look behind him or check whatever he is standing on top of. We're having another rematch with Balrog once again, who is very easy at this point for normal playthroughs, but we will see, we have already seen one of the big benefits to the weapon I just picked up, that it's very good at taking down projectiles that enemies shoot at you. Most projectiles in the game are destructible. The Bubline kind of makes a sort of force field around you. That being said, there's often fights where there's so many projectiles. Yes, it is nice to be able to stop those projectiles. You'll unfortunately just be in an impasse where the boss is shooting exactly the number of projectiles to stop you from ever hitting it. At this point, it's perfectly good. That is if you can avoid getting hit. It has a very low maximum level, and that makes it so if you take one hit, sometimes two, it immediately downgrades to a weapon that is not particularly good at taking out bosses. After completing yet another puzzle, I say puzzle, the puzzles haven't actually really started yet, but in Undertale, we have also picked up another jellyfish juice, which we will use at Santa's house to pick up a fascinating item, one of the ingredients for the bomb we're now making. After beating Balrog, we rescued the robot, which will now make a bomb for us if we can provide him with the ingredients. And in Undertale, we have another mini-boss. Basically, Snowden is just many mini-bosses, many puzzles, all leading up to the town itself. Sort of the opposite of what you see in a typical game. I mentioned this in the past, but a difficult part of this run is absolutely going to be starting in this Snowdin area, where the game has now added specific attacks that you dodge by standing still. And while it doesn't actually interrupt the other game very much, if I'm not actually paying attention, mainly if I have my focus on Cave Story, those those attacks are very, very difficult to dodge and to time properly, as I've very much noticed already. We're still not taking too much damage in a fight where we can afford to make several mistakes all in a row, but... And to be perfectly honest, I was never very good at this game to begin with. Though I must admit, it does make me curious to see perhaps how far we could take this. Though, maybe not to the end, as it would take me perhaps a year, 2 years. It's not difficult to make progress now, but I expect that at some point in time, both games will reach a point where the challenge takes so many tries that the other game also gets to a point that takes several tries, and then once I'm doing both at the same time, perhaps then the progress would come to a grinding halt for who knows how long. Back to the game. We have Cave Story, getting a key to the warehouse, where we will pick up the final ingredient for the grenade. Undertale, we are continuing with puzzles, like I said. They're still not absolutely horrific, but they're starting to become a little bit difficult to not make a couple of mistakes. And we're also going around picking up various upgrades in Cave Story that I neglected up to this point. We're not overly concerned with picking up everything, given that if we don't succeed at something, it certainly won't be because we don't have 5 more missiles, but I have a reason for delaying Cave Story that I will get to a little bit later. We have what is actually a very, very long conversation that we can solve one of 2 ways, where we simply proceed with answering yes to Papyrus's questions, and then the puzzle fails, or the far more amusing solution, which is to say over and over again that you do not understand, and he will try to explain it time and time again, and eventually confuse himself, meaning that I'm not the only one that's confused. And keep this in mind for the future. Alternate solutions are very much your friend when you're doing a run that is particularly difficult, especially if the alternate solution is merely just to bash your head against the wall over and over again. But we'll get to that later. Cave Story, I am purposefully delaying, like I said, for good reason. Up to this point, I've mostly just been making progress almost sporadically, spread between the two. But I know in Undertale, we've got these horrendous puzzles, ice puzzles, which certainly makes you want to commit double suicide, which our characters are now attempting right now. But once we're completed with those puzzles, after that, we have another challenge coming up that I wanted to put to the test. I wanted to see if I took these somewhat minimal challenges and tried to time it so they were going on at the same time. How would that play out? We pick up the gum base, which is the final ingredient, and that's when we're met with misery. At the same time, we're fighting Greater Dog, which is... I'm lining up 2 boss battles, one after the other, neither of which are particularly difficult, but when you can't read what Greater Dog is saying to you, and you can't focus on dodging in Cave Story, well, you'll see. And as much as I very much enjoy Undertale's music. This particular song is a little bit annoying, so it's nice that I can occasionally cut back and forth to some lovely cave story music. Now, I definitely choose to go with the remastered audio, even though the original is quite good. It's so much fresher. I mean, I've played through Cave Story many, many times, and it's nice to be able to hear a fresh new take on the music. Probably the biggest difficulty with this particular fight that I noticed almost immediately once I actually start fighting, it's that I spent probably this entire fight with one goal, and that is to not eat the snowman, which was in my inventory. I tried so hard to not eat it. But in doing that, focusing so much on that, we in fact are whittled down to not much. We haven't done much damage to the boss in Cave Story, and he ends our very lives. And we get to go back to the very lovely music of Undertale. Not that I don't love Mario Paint songs. This one is not my favorite. Both games have music that's not necessarily my favorite, but it certainly sounds a lot better than if I were to actually layer the music. One of the biggest difficulties with making something like this is trying to make it so not everything clashes, especially the audio, where imagine if I had the music from Undertale, the music from Cave Story, the button pressing from Undertale, the shooting from Cave Story, and then my rambling on top of that. Now it would be a bit much to deal with. So our rematch with Balfrog, I believe, it's going to go far easier because indeed we did beat the boss in Undertale on our first try, but this gives us a great example of exactly what the tactics are going to be for most of these fights. Not all of them, but a lot of the times you can just stand there and do as much damage as you possibly can. It doesn't matter how hard the fight is. If the fight is short, you probably can't lose. And yes, I did unfortunately eat the snowman, I believe. Even though I tried so very hard and it cost me my life in Cave Story. One thing that does sadden me about this 2 games at once is that success is probably the biggest letdown, where you very much want to accomplish 2 things at the same time, because it would feel wonderful to get those victory screens synced up. Unfortunately, if the difficulty and your playing is not perfectly in sync, once you succeed, then the other game continues, and the other is forced to, well, do it at a much easier pace. Now, I could certainly put the restriction on myself to reset the games over and over again until I got to beat them both at the exact same time, but we'd be here till winter, and I still wouldn't be anywhere through this game. And with that, Papyrus's puzzles have come to an end. In addition to having gathered all of the ingredients for the bomb, which we can make post-haste. With the final puzzle, we'll call it, out of the way, we can actually make our way into Snowdin, which will be our stopping point for the end of this video. I would like to thank you for joining me once again, and for you to have a good day.